Today I review a movie that desperately needs a doctor. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 2019 movie One Remains. Now I'm doing something I typically don't do. I'm kind of going a little bit out of order here. Typically what I'll do is I will watch a movie and then let it simmer for a day or two, write some notes on it, and record in the morning. However, I just finished watching this one probably about an hour ago. And first of all, it was just released yesterday on Amazon Prime. So I kind of feel compelled to hop on the bandwagon early, to be perfectly honest. But also, I really wanted to discuss this one while it was fresh in my brain. There's not a whole lot that I really want to let simmer necessarily, but there is plenty that I want to talk about. If you're familiar with the ATBGE subreddit, Awful Thought But Great Execution, that's where they'll take obscene tattoos that were actually masterfully done and show pictures of those, things like that. And in this case, the only thought I had was, this was awful execution, but great thought. It was a slightly different concept there. I'll go ahead and throw up all the scores all at once here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. Now, this movie followed the character of Molly, who is a documentarian, and her crew that are investigating something. It is left ambiguous as to what initially, but her and her crew arrive at a very rural homestead in which there is a secondary home, kind of off the home guest house in which they can stay. You get the idea that the primary homeowner of the main home is the one that they want to be interviewing. And bear this in mind. Okay, pause right there. Now keep this moment in mind. Now, the homeowner, basically what happened is that sometime in the past, there were a group of hikers or, campers, outdoors people that basically were found by a park ranger to be horribly maimed, and this man that owns this house is the park ranger. And it was kind of apparently a mystery for the ages. Nobody really figured out what happened to them, and the finding of their bodies left this park ranger in a state of mental decay. Now, the reason I had you pause at that moment is because everything about the plot that I've described since then, about how the campers were found, how the park ranger, and so on and so forth, that was all explained half an hour into the movie. The half an hour prior was basically them just showing up, introducing the characters, talking amongst each other, and generally farting around. Half an hour of the movie was spent wondering what in the world they were even doing, aside from the fact that you knew they were shooting a documentary for some reason. So this really, it takes its time really finding its legs and even introducing any kind of plot to the audience at all. And this is what I mean by the fact that in my opening stinger there, that this is a movie that desperately needs a doctor. It desperately needs a script doctor, and it desperately needs a better editor. The reason that the intent score is so low is because the technical portion is so low, and they have a direct correlation with one another. What I found about this movie is that there were actually some genuinely good moments in it. For a low-budget, small indie production, they had some good concepts. And there were 1 or 2 little devices in here that really worked for me, but they never, ever fleshed them out, and the editing never did them justice. There was one moment in particular where they're watching a tape with the park ranger, and like I said, he's in a state of mental decay. He's introducing this tape to them. Hey, when I found their bodies, I had my camera on me. You want to see the footage? Okay. So they're watching it, and the way that it played out had great suspenseful build-up. As the scene is getting more and more intense, the park ranger, he's clenching his fists more, and there's suspense building in the room, and the way that they filmed it was really well done. And then it kept breaking and cutting to one of the other characters basically having some tequila shots with his grandson in the guest house. And it kept breaking that tension. And it's like, what are you doing? You finally had me. And it just kept, getting in its own way like that. And the technical was the big portion of that. there was a moment later on that was really, really well done, but I don't really feel like it was fleshed out too well. And as far as the plot itself goes and the script and why it needs a doctor is because for all of the good moments of this, it meandered, and it was pretty poor at conveying a convincing storyline. I finished watching it, and I still couldn't tell you what the mythos was about, what the evil was about, what rules they were inhabiting, what the whole concept of one remains necessarily is. They give some hints, but they don't really go out of its way to explain it, and it left me a bit lost by the end. And back to the editing and post-production, basically. There were moments in which the outdoor scenes desperately needed some color correction, and it could have so easily been done in, Premiere, After Effects, whatever software they were doing. Color correction could have fixed a lot of that. As it was, it felt a bit amateurish. And then there were just glaring mistakes at one point, towards the last 10-15 minutes of the movie, without giving any kind of spoilers. It took place within the woods outside of the home there in the more rural area, and they couldn't leave with their vehicle because, according to an antagonist, the roads were washed out. And there's a heavy storm happening, and you heard a heavy storm happening. As they're in the woods, you hear rain, trickle, thunder, not thunder, but, a lot of heavy rain going down. Bone dry actors throughout for the last 10-15 minutes, not a single wet strand of hair on their heads as you heard this rain coming down. It was this kind of glaring mistakes that was just prevalent throughout the movie that really, it took this good concept and these good thoughts and this nugget that really should have been cared for and fostered and turned from a good idea into a great movie, and never allowed it to achieve it. And the acting is a good example of that as well. The characters that are introduced, and they all basically have, a stereotype one-note element of themselves. Okay, you're going to be the hyper-religious one. You're going to be the lesbian. And that's pretty much the embodiment of the characters. There was no depth or anything surrounding them that allowed them to explore more. And once things started actually happening, that's when I saw some really good acting performances come through. But the script never allowed that to happen until the final act of the movie, at the very least. And up until then, I was just thinking that the acting was poor. Vanessa Leigh, who played Molly, was the only consistently good one throughout. Aaron Bennett, he played a character, Russell. He was just basically an a-hole throughout. And that was, like I said, the one note stereotype embodiment of his character, and it was just irritating and grating. But then once he was actually given something to work with, all of a sudden I was, wow, he's actually delivering a pretty good performance. So this whole movie is just kind of a mixed bag of professionalism and good ideas and good moments that is just completely marred by just oversight and sloppiness. And ultimately I wound up in a place of 28 out of 100 points. I cannot recommend this movie, but it's an interesting watch in terms of trying to dissect what does and doesn't work in the context of going from script to screen. For anybody that's studying film, this is a really good one to actually analyze. If you are in a film watchers class, maybe this is actually one that raise your hand and recommend it for the class to watch and dissect, because I think it's worth it. Not necessarily as a great movie to fawn over, but a movie to actually dissect and try and discuss on a practical, technical level what worked, what didn't, why, and how it could have worked better. Because I think that on that level, on that discussion point, this is worth watching. But beyond that, I can't really say that I recommend it. Not as a horror film, not as a film in general. It just wasn't worth the time investment. But that's it. That's my review of 2019's One Remains. I really thank you for joining me here today. If you like these videos, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.